It's Monday night here in England, and I want to talk about Danny Garcia versus Robert Guerrero. Now, this fight obviously happened late on Saturday night. I'm covering it, 48 hours later, something like that. So I'm not going to go through it round by round, purely because if that sort of analysis will be of interest to you, you'll have found it elsewhere by now. What I'm going to talk about is my sort of reflections on the fight generally, and where both guys go from here, in my opinions. Let's start with Robert Guerrero. He is a guy who performs, in my opinion, quite averagely when in fights that he is expected to win comfortably. We look at Robert Guerrero versus Aaron Martinez. We look at Robert Guerrero versus Kamagai. Those were both fights where Robert Guerrero would have started a substantial favourite. He'd have certainly been the bigger name by far. But on both occasions, he failed to really dominate and failed to impress. And whilst the fights were extremely visually entertaining, he possibly made harder work. However, having said that, Robert Guerrero is a guy who is still capable, even at this stage of his career, of raising his game substantially for the real big fights. And I think that dynamic possibly caused me to underestimate him in the build-up to this fight. I saw Robert Guerrero really struggling with Aaron Martinez. I saw Guerrero getting dropped by Martinez. And I thought Danny Garcia's caught him at the right time. Danny Garcia, if Martinez can drop him, Danny Garcia can knock him out. But I was wrong. Whilst Danny Garcia obviously did go on to win the fight, Robert Guerrero made it a lot more competitive than I anticipated. And certainly didn't get knocked out. He lost on points. So credit to Robert Guerrero for that. I assume what this relates to is he takes training camp very seriously. He takes sparring very seriously when he is, in these kind of fights. Because against Keith Thurman, against Danny Garcia, he's put up real spirited performances. Actually, he's done really well in both of those fights. So clearly, when he's up against a big name, when the chips are down, when everything's against him, he's still capable of raising his game to a near elite level and performing really well. And to be honest, Robert Guerrero is a hard man to dominate. I think Keith Thurman possibly did a slightly better job than Danny Garcia, but Keith Thurman had his moments. The only guy who's actually really dominated Robert Guerrero was obviously Floyd Mayweather. And, perhaps that shows just how clear Floyd is ahead of the rest of the competition. If you contrast Floyd's performance against Guerrero with Danny Garcia's, for example. Danny Garcia, in contrast, is almost the opposite of Robert Guerrero. When the chips are down, when I say almost the opposite, I don't know what I'm talking about. Ignore that comment. He's actually not dissimilar to Robert Guerrero in a sense that when the chips are down, when Danny Garcia is expected to lose a fight, he puts in career-best performances. Amir Khan was a big favourite in Amir Khan's fight with Danny Garcia. Danny Garcia won by big knockout. Then he went and fought Lucas Matisse. A lot of shrewd people in boxing were really thinking Lucas Matisse was a bit of a beast and that Danny Garcia wouldn't be able to live with him whatsoever. But what happened? Danny Garcia went out, he hurt Matisse, dropped Matisse, and won in, reasonably convincing fashion. So what I mean is, like Robert Guerrero, Danny Garcia really raises his game for the big fights. And, when he fought Khan, when he fought Matisse, there was no doubt. But almost similar to Guerrero, when he fights in the fights where he's really expected to win, he struggles to impress and almost labours to victory. He's a fighter who he kind of just does enough. He wins by a round. We look at the Herrera fight. We look at the Lamont Peterson fight. Now we look at the Guerrero fights. He's a fighter who, whilst winning all of those fights, has allowed fights to be a lot closer than you would anticipate. And he's allowed those fights to have debatable decisions where the opposing fighter feels that they've won the fight and some of their fans call for rematches, Now, I personally think Garcia won the fight against Guerrero. I also am one of seemingly the minority who thought Garcia won the fight against Lamont Peterson. But certainly his dominance seems to drop when he's in fights, when he's a substantial favourite. And I think that is possibly a contributing factor to why I got my predictions so wrong in this fight. It's because I'm thinking Danny Garcia you know, it's going to really, really raise his game, and Robert Guerrero is coming to the end of his career. But I guess in hindsight, Robert Guerrero was getting up for one last big fight and one last attempt at making it back to the world title scene, whereas Danny Garcia is starting a fight where he's a massive favourite, 1-10 on in some places to win, and perhaps he's less motivated. And what ended up happening is, whilst Garcia, from my perspective, wasn't really in danger of losing the fight, it became a lot closer, a lot more competitive than perhaps it needed to be. You know, Garcia is a slow starter sometimes, but he really gifted the first few rounds to Guerrero here and let Guerrero get off to a substantial lead. Let me say, I know a lot of people are watching this fight and really fancying the job against Danny Garcia. You know, there's some speculation that his power hasn't translated to 147 as much as it was at £140. And there may be some truth in that. You know, Robert Guerrero's never struck me as a big welterweight. You know, he's always struck me actually on the smaller side of welterweight, to be honest. And Garcia almost looked the smaller man out of the two. So there may actually be something in that Garcia isn't as big a puncher at 147 as he was at 140. I just wonder if he lacks the size to be a dominant puncher in that division. But regardless, I think a lot of people are looking at Garcia as an easy mark. They're thinking he's had a few gift decisions. They're thinking he's easy to be outboxed. They're thinking movement is his kryptonite. And they're thinking he doesn't carry the same power. But I think those people are wrong to overlook Danny Garcia. Because Danny Garcia is a guy who does enough to win. And he's capable of raising his game massively for the big occasion. You know, the performance he put in yesterday probably wouldn't have beaten Lucas Matisse. You know, what I'm getting at is that's not an elite Danny Garcia. But we know that when he's up against it and his back's against the wall, he can really pull out a big performance. So, you know, whilst it wasn't as impressive a win, Danny Garcia kind of leaves me with the feeling that he's got a bit more left up his sleeve, and that yet again he can produce that on the big occasion. And whilst he looks very beatable on tape, nobody's beaten him. And what I must say about Danny Garcia is he is slowly but surely creating one of the top resumes in boxing, you know. And before people laugh at that comment, let's actually consider his resume. A win against Amir Khan, a win against Lamont Peterson, a win against Mauricio Herrera, a win against Robert Guerrero, a win against Lucas Matisse. You know, I'm sure there's loads of names in there that I've left out. Those are just the ones that are coming to me. You know, for every one of those fights, there's been a Rod Salker in there or a Paulie Malignaggi. And yeah, I understand why people say he's a cherry picker, because he has taken some easier fights. But if you actually look at it, and if you look past the sort of obvious insult, he's slowly but surely building a real superstar resume. And he's still unbeaten. And you know, he needs to be respected. Whilst he looks easy to beat on tape, clearly he's not easy to beat. And you get that with some fighters. You know, people know I'm a massive Tyson Fury fan. Lots of people look at Tyson Fury and see he's ungainly and see he's not in the best physical condition and just think, oh, Vladimir Klitschko, Deontay Wilder, Anthony Joshua would destroy him. But when you're actually in the ring with him, it's a different matter. And to be fair to Danny Garcia, it does seem to be a different matter in terms of beating Garcia. He's clearly not an easy man to dominate and an easy man to beat. You know, I think this was a close fight in the sense that there wasn't much in the rounds. You know, there wasn't like dominant rounds for one or dominant rounds for the other. All the rounds were quite gritty, quite competitive, and Guerrero did get off to a better start. But for me, Danny Garcia won the fight. Do I want to see a rematch? No, not really. You know, I'd give Robert Guerrero less chance, to be honest, in a rematch. You know, Guerrero, he's not getting any younger. Every fight he's taken a lot of punishment, and even though his punch resistance held up, and even though he'd obviously trained very hard for this fight, he's come into the autumn of his career. And, you know, the fights that for me are more entertaining for Robert Guerrero, and, you know, if he can retire, I'd suggest he does retire, because his health is the most important thing. But if he is going to stay in this sport, perhaps dropping a level ever so slightly. I mean, clearly he needs to fight at a level above Aaron Martinez and Kamagai, or else he's not going to be motivated. But I just don't really want to see him fighting Kell Brook or Amir Khan or Sean Porter, you know, because I think he loses that level of fight now. So maybe to use him more as a gatekeeper, I'd be interested in Guerrero Errol Spence or Even Guerrero versus Sammy Vasquez, who won impressively on the weekend. You know, as for Danny Garcia, where does he go from here? You know, a lot of people are calling Danny Garcia out. He's seen as the easy money in the division. He's seen as a beatable mark. He can be outboxed, outmoved, supposedly. As I say, I think it's harder than that. His mandatory is Amir Khan, but the WBC probably isn't the most aggressive in terms of forcing mandatories. So we'll have to see if that fight happens. You know, I've made it clear on my channel, I'd like to see Khan Brook. Khan Brook would be my preference. Having said that, I must acknowledge Khan Garcia is a big fight and a fight that I would really, really enjoy. That's not a bad fight for Garcia to take because stylistically, he may just have the beating of Amir Khan, you know. I know the other talk is that he may have to face the winner of Lamont Peterson versus Berto at some point. Andre Berto, he's another one who for me is slightly below top level, and you know, Lamont Peterson, we've been there, done that. I'd kind of like to see Garcia take a big fight this year, and you know, if the Amir Khan fight happens, that's certainly a big fight. It's possibly a sensible fight for him to make, you know. But if it doesn't happen, I'd like to see him in a big matchup. You know, the winner of Keith Thurman Porter, perhaps, maybe even a Kell Brook. Maybe even the Pacquiao-Bradley winner. I know they're on different sides of the coin, but nevertheless, you know, those kind of matchups, you know, because Danny Garcia, for me, is slowly building a resume that's positioning him just off the pound-for-pound list. And if he had one more huge win at welterweight, you know, if he had a Thurman on his resume, or a Brook, or a Porter, and I'm not saying he necessarily wins those fights, but if he was able to win those fights, we do have to enter Danny Garcia in the conversation of pound-for-pound top 5 if he were to take one of those big matchups. So, you know, I'd like to see him move in that direction. I really would. That's my thoughts on the fights. If you've enjoyed this video, I'm going to film a top 10 welterweight ranking video tomorrow. You know, my heavyweight series, a lot of people commented on it saying they wanted me to rank the welterweights and the middleweights, etc. Welterweight was the most popular, so I'm going to try and get a video of that up tomorrow. So if you're interested in that division and you know you like this kind of chat, please subscribe to the channel, and you can see my welterweight rankings coming very, very soon. But no, thanks very much for everyone tuning in. Let me know your thoughts on this fight. Where do the guys go from here? You know, what's the future for both men? What fights would you like to see them in? And yeah, how did you score it? Competitive for me, close for me, but a win for Danny Garcia. As always, Danny Garcia does enough. He looks beatable, but I don't think he's as beatable as he looks. I think he's a real tough mark. If you've enjoyed this video, please support the channel by giving me a like, click the thumbs up. That would help me out a bit. Thanks very much for watching, everyone.